Okay, in this video, and I've sort of blown it up on the screen a little bit, I've gone into assignments and then I'm looking at the beginning of the rhetorical analysis folder. So this would be on the outside before you go into the actual folder. And what I've done is I've put this kind of image there because when we talk about rhetoric, um, we use the rhetorical triangle. You may also see it as the Aristotle triangle because he's credited with some of the concepts for rhetoric, and it goes back that far in philosophy. Another thing that many of you may equate to rhetoric would be a lot of politicians these days. We're seeing a lot of debates, or we see politicians speaking out against their opponents. And sometimes the word rhetoric is sort of thrown around. And basically, all rhetoric is the way a message is communicated. And so sometimes in a political arena, if one candidate believes one thing and another believes something else, then there might be a statement like, well, that's just his rhetoric, or he's throwing away, or she's throwing around her rhetoric. And really, simply, that means they're communicating their opinion or their viewpoint on a position of some topic that they're discussing in the debate. And so sometimes rhetoric sort of gets a bad rap. It's sort of has a connotation for negative thoughts or negative views, and that's not really what it is. So if someone says, well, that's just their rhetoric, really all they're saying is that's just the way they communicate. That's just the way they put the message out there. The thing I love about rhetoric is you guys use it every single day. If you go to Chick-fil-A and you are trying to choose off of their menu, there is some reason why you're choosing something. If we watch a commercial on TV, whether we're going to buy a car or, I don't know, a type of snack or a meal or something, whatever we're being asked to purchase, that they're using rhetoric to try to convince us that their product is better. I know years ago, the Yeti cup, everybody said, well, that's the best because, it keeps ice longer. It's a better cup. And then other types of cups came out and they were kind of just the same, but because Yeti had the name and the recognition, they were sort of given more power with their message that their cup was better. But really, if you truly measured the differences of the cups that are available, I think Walmart has a certain version and other brands are available, you would sort of see that the message is more about the branding than the actual content of the message. I hope that makes sense. In the In Defense of Rhetoric video that you'll watch from Clemson, they talk about choosing schools, and that's something that you guys will always will be doing in the future if you haven't already chosen where you're going to transfer after you finish with JCC. But some people will choose a school because their parents like that school or because their neighbor went there. Sometimes they'll go to that school and they're not happy because they didn't receive the message clearly. They were just they were using criteria that didn't really give them a clear message about their choice. And so really rhetoric is a message. It's a form of communication. We all use it every day. If I were to ask someone to go to lunch with me, not while we're quarantined, but another time, I would maybe want to go someplace that wouldn't be desirable to them. And to get them to go where I wanted to go and to do what I wanted them to do, I would use rhetorical strategies to try to convince them that going to lunch to the place where I wanted to go is the best idea. So I enjoy Outback. I like their menu choices, and I know it's a chain restaurant, but I love going there. I like their Caesar salad. I like their grilled chicken. I don't really eat steak, so that's kind of weird that I want to go there, but I like their food because I have to eat gluten-free. That's a component of the message because part of their persuasion for people who can't have gluten is, hey, we have a gluten-free menu, so I feel safer there. This is all going out of their messaging for marketing and how they give me the message that their restaurant is the best choice. But let's say I asked you to go to lunch with me one day. Again, we're assuming that we're not quarantined and we can actually go in the restaurant to eat. But I would have to consider a few things about my messaging and my persuasion to get someone to go to Outback with me for lunch or dinner. And one of those things would be, does the person I'm asking to go with me even enjoy a meat type of a meal? I have friends who are vegans or pescatarians, which means, I hope I get this right, I think they just eat seafood. And vegans, of course, don't eat anything associated with an animal. And then you have your vegetarians. And so there are different types of eating styles that we all have. And so I would have to consider that in my message for whoever I was asking to go. So I have to consider my audience. I also have to consider my tone. So I wouldn't want to go, I'm like, you're going to lunch with me, because that's sort of abrupt. And who wants to go with someone who's angry? I would maybe go, hey, what are you doing for lunch? We have a break from work. Let's go have lunch. And I would maybe put a positive tone to my message, and the way I begin to create that persuasion. So I would think about my tone. I would think about my message. I would also consider my audience, who I was asking to go to lunch with me, who I was asking to go to Outback. And thinking about that audience, again, I would think about what they enjoyed eating. But at the same time, since I'm trying to persuade, I'm going to think about, well, how do I get them to do that, even if it's not some place that they really like a lot? So we do this every day. And we're going to talk about this more detailed with the chart, but there are 3 elements to good communication, and that's using credibility. So you want the person who's giving you the message to have some credibility, and oftentimes you want them to be ethical with their message. Sometimes that plays in and sometimes not. You also want, in a message, if you're trying to persuade someone, you want to bring in some feelings to it. We as humans attach ourselves to certain feelings, and there are certain feelings that we all sort of share, or we all sort of can be attracted to. So for instance, puppies. You may not want to own a puppy, but if you saw a puppy and it was really cute, you would have some sort of feeling about that. So we all share some common emotions that we gravitate towards. And then you also have logos, which is logic. So any message you give, any message you receive, you want to have some logic associated with that, because if it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't fit, then we as human communicators, we may not attach ourselves so well to an illogical message. We may not believe the message if the person giving us the content and the information is not ethical or is not clear and credible. We see this a lot even today. We're going through this kind of pandemic thing with the COVID-19 virus, and there are a lot of uncertainties. There are a lot of unknowns. We're having to rely on people, and we have to think about their credibility for that message. And, I think we all probably approach that differently. But as I watch the news information that comes out with the news every afternoon, I think usually the governor of North Carolina and sometimes the president comes out about once a day. I'm looking at the people who are giving me that message, and I'm trying to figure out, do I trust them? Because when there are a lot of unknowns, or when the message is unclear, or I myself am not an expert in that field, I want to know if the person giving me the information is credible. With this pandemic, there are a lot of emotions involved with it, because we're thinking about our family and ourselves and our community, and we want everybody to be safe. So that's something that plays into it. Some people would argue that a lot of the messages in the media right now are very emotional, and they're trying to bring fear in us. And then if I talk to my friends who are in the medical community, they're saying, no, be fearful. So, you're having to find the people that you trust for the message you're given. And then with the logic, I know for me, and again, I always tell you guys, I'm sort of a nerd, so I'm going to look at a lot of research and a lot of different methods of communication. I'm going to look at the news feeds. I'm going to read on my own. I'm going to try to find some scholarly content for any message I'm trying to understand. But with this pandemic thing we're dealing with the unknowns and with trying to get messages about it, Is it logical? So I talked to one of my friends the other day, and he said, how is this logical that, people get the flu every year? And then my response, well, is people understand the flu and they understand how to treat it, and we have medicines for it, and we have protocols for the treatment. And with what we're dealing with right now, maybe that's not completely clear to all of us. So anyway, I going back to the idea of going to Outback for lunch, if I were trying to persuade someone to go with me to eat lunch, I would have to think about myself being credible and giving them clear information. So if I knew for sure that they were someone who only ate seafood, I would want to include that in my message so that I was not giving them unclear information. So I would want to make sure that there was seafood on the menu. I would want to make sure that there were vegetables available for them if they did not eat meat. Emotions. If someone had a bad experience with Outback, I would have to consider that as I gave that message to make sure that they didn't have some kind of emotional reason why they wouldn't want to eat there. And then logic, I would want to think about what may or may not convince them logically to go eat there. So that anytime you receive a message, anytime you give a message, rhetoric plays a part in it. Okay, so let's go over ethos. The way I remember ethos is ethics. And while ethics don't play a part in every single message, because sometimes, it's just not really we're not thinking about the ethics of the person speaking, but credibility is something you want to consider. Ethics and credibility, and also authority. Does the person speaking have authority over the message? And I think we all have people in our lives that we've dealt with or communicated with, and they like to just say whatever comes to mind, or they want to give kind of an answer, but they don't really have any credibility behind that message. They haven't worked in that field. They don't have any authority. They don't have an education for it. We know they're not well read in that area. So you have to think about that. Credibility, authority, and ethics would be ethos. And I just remember that because ethics, ethos, it's sort of a word part, but it's not just ethics. So a lot of times we equate the ethos with the speaker because that means whoever's speaking is credible. Or in your case, you're going to be analyzing an article, so you would want to look at who's writing the article, and are they ethical? Do they have authority over the topic? And are they credible? And as you analyze, if you determine that they're not credible, you can still analyze that. It doesn't mean that you just dismiss it. You could look at the message and determine if that message is clear, if the person is not credible, or if the person is not an authority over that topic. So going back to I don't know if you've watched any of the news where the governor and doctors or when President Trump and then maybe some of the doctors and people are standing there, you have to think with that message, are the people speaking to me credible? Are they an authority? So I know I think his name is Dr. Fauci, that speaks for the national news when President Trump is speaking with some of the people, the national leaders. A lot of people like Dr. Fauci because they feel like he is an authority. He's a specialist in infectious diseases. I hope I said that right. And so since he's a specialist and he's the leading authority on that topic, we can trust what he's saying. Now, I know I've seen interviews with other doctors or other people in the medical field, and sort of personally, I may question, are they an authority over this infectious disease that we're discussing? So I hope that makes sense. So that's ethos. Then you want to look at pathos. A lot of times pathos deals a lot with who is receiving the information, because we all have different styles of receiving emotion or having emotion or displaying feelings. So if you're the speaker or the writer, you have to consider who your audience is. If you're reading something and you're analyzing it, you have to consider, how did that author or how did that speaker determine the audience? How did that speaker or writer determine how to appeal to the audience? And in your analysis, you need to sort of think, did they make the right choices with that? So a lot of politicians get sort of a bad rap for having the wrong approach to their audience. Sometimes they're too abrupt. Sometimes they don't speak a fact. Sometimes they may be debating and they get too emotional with their inflection, their tone, and all those things play into if the message is clearly given. I know sometimes some politicians will misspeak. Of course, they're on live television or they're doing an interview in real time, and they don't have a lot of time to get a polished answer together. But at the same time, if you're receiving that message, you have to determine if it is a clear message, or if it's something that you want to believe or understand properly. So again, if you're giving the message, you have to consider who you're giving the message to, and if that audience, that person is receiving it properly. And then if you're analyzing a message, you have to determine if the writer or the speaker determined how to give that message properly. So pathos is a Greek term for emotion. So whenever you're studying pathos, you want to consider the feelings or emotions that the person giving the message determined to be proper. And then as you analyze it, you want to ask yourself, did they do a good job of reaching the emotion or pathos? The appeal to pathos does make a person feel a certain way. So it can make them feel sad, angry, anxious. It can make them feel motivated to do something. So a lot of what we do in this class is persuasion. So a lot of the authors are trying to persuade a thought. You guys, with researching your topic, and I've asked you to write a claim that you'll kind of carry through all the assignments. And of course, you can tweak it as you go a little bit. But, and guys, if you hear a bunch of little pitter patter of the feet, I'm just going to take a break here. We have 2 dogs, and they get very anxious when one of their people is not paying attention to them. They're very needy dogs. So I apologize if you're hearing this kind of commotion in the background. But let me get back to this. So when we appeal to pathos, we're trying to appeal to those underlying feelings and emotions that humans have, and usually it's a general one. So if you look at politicians, a lot of times when they're campaigning, they will speak to poverty, better wages, buying homes, economy, stock market, higher minimum wage, better health care. All these things tie back to emotion, because you got to think, if you have a grandparent, if you yourself don't have health insurance, that sometimes is an emotional appeal because you want to feel like you're taken care of. So that's why sometimes in the political realm, they're appealing to those kind of emotional things that if they can really get the sensibility to someone who's going to vote for them, if they can get it right, they get that vote. And so a lot of times they are appealing to our pathos. And so I, for one, am a little bit skeptical of that. If someone appeals to my emotions, I'm skeptical by nature. So I'm often thinking, am I being played? Do they think I have a certain kind of emotion? I'll be honest with you. As a person, I'm a very caring, empathetic person, but I don't do well with someone playing with emotions. I tend to turn those off very easily. So I often tell my students, like, if you really want me to consider changing a policy with you or giving you some sort of extension or trying to work with you and change my direction with you, crying to me is the worst thing you could ever do, because when someone cries to me, I feel like they're trying to play my emotions and they've misjudged me as their audience. Because honestly, if somebody cries to me, and it may seem kind of cold to say it this way, but if somebody cries to me and I feel like they're using it as a device to get me to change my mind, I often turn that off. It's just something about my personality. Other people, when they see tears, they're automatically going to change it. And they're like, okay, you're crying, I'm going to let you do it. I'm the opposite. So I often say, like, you're going to be better off coming to me with some solutions and no tears than coming to me with tears. So that's why sometimes you have to tweak those things depending on your audience. And I think that in the political communities, sometimes the politicians play it wrong. They think that they're able to manipulate some emotions in the voters, and sometimes they don't get it right. Sometimes they do. So that's sometimes in speeches and things, that's something they should consider with getting their message out there. Okay, lastly, we have logos. I always remember logos logic. It's again a word part. All of these things are kind of Greek word parts, and they play into the English words. So logos is Greek for logic. You can also think of logic as reasoning. The reason why something is the way it is, the reason why a thought process should change or a perception should change. So you're giving data, evidence of something logical. So the message should always be logical, and you're going to include all the facts and figures and things that back up your position. If you're analyzing someone's work, if you're analyzing a message that someone has given you, ask yourself, was it a logical message? Does it make sense? Does it fit? Like, do the puzzle pieces fit? And if you find that they don't, then you have to consider, well, did that person not get their logic right? Is the logos skewed? The data. That's why it's so important when you write an essay and you use research that you apply that research properly. If you're just throwing in some facts and figures and it doesn't logically fit with your message, then you're sort of losing out with that opportunity to be credible. So all three of these things work together in this triangle, and you can't have one without the other. I tell the story many years ago when my son was little. He had stayed at his grandfather's for the day. I think he was sick, or maybe school was out or something. And my son always did sports. And so I think he was about 5 or 6. He was little, but he probably did like a YMCA sport. And we had to get him to that. So after work, I had called my dad, and he was going to help me with time. My dad lives in Cary. I work in Smithfield. So we were going to meet halfway about in Clayton, where I live, so that I could get my son to his activity that evening. And I remember I talked to my dad, who lives in Cary, and I said, okay, well, about halfway, why don't you meet me at Smithfield Barbecue? And some of you that may be familiar with Highway 70, and they're sort of renovating it right now, but there's a Smithfield Barbecue right there, sort of in the middle on Highway 70. So in my mind, when I said, let's meet at Smithfield Barbecue, I did not specify which Smithfield Barbecue we were going to meet up at so that I could get my son and take him to his activity. And I'm telling you this example because when I got to the Smithfield Barbecue, he wasn't there. And my dad's very prompt. And I thought, well, that's odd. He's not here. So I called him. He said, yeah, I'm sitting at Smithfield Barbecue. And I was like, well, you're not here. Where are you? He had gone to the Smithfield Barbecue off of Jones Sausage Road. Because I had not considered my audience, because I didn't logically think through the process of meeting someone coming from Cary, I was only kind of thinking of myself. And so that triangle kind of got broken with the communication. My dad went to one Smithfield Barbecue. I went to another. We both had kind of a logical reasoning, but it didn't match up with my message. It didn't match up with how I was trying to persuade him to bring my son to me so I could take him to the activity. And that's something you have to think about when you communicate. Are you hitting all of these elements of communication with logic, authority, and emotion? And so, we worked it out. It was, something that just happened, and it was just an odd occurrence. But think about that many times when you communicate. If you miss one of those marks, there's a break in the communication. As you analyze as we watch the videos, as you analyze different things that I'm asking you to analyze, you have to look at all three of these things. And it's okay if sometimes you find that the logic is not well presented, or if you feel like they did not use emotional appeals when they should have. So if you find that the message is not clear in some way, I'm not asking you to gloss it over and say, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm asking you to analyze it and actually show why it didn't work, or show why it did work. And you want evidence to back that up. So you can use quotes, you can use the data, you can use the information from the article or from the videos that I'm asking you to analyze. So I hope this sort of helps you see what rhetoric is, and I hope that sort of makes sense. I'm going to go into the rhetorical analysis folder really quickly. I'm not going to go over all the handouts with you. I'm sort of expecting you to do that yourself. And of course, it's being a little slow. I'm going to get it a little smaller maybe. I'm going to go down to where the handouts are. And there's a handout in here that includes some information. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I think it's worth mentioning so that you'll go back and read it. With this rhetorical context, what is it? It's showing you how to consider certain things like situation, audience, and tone, while the featured part of analyzing is the logos, pathos, ethos with rhetoric. You also want to have some subcategories that you look at for proper communication, and situation, audience, tone. Also, I would say intended audience. Who are they trying to reach exactly? And be careful when you are analyzing to say, oh, it's for everybody, because most messages aren't for everybody. It's for a specific audience. And if you say general audience, is it for every single citizen in the whole universe, or is it just for an academic audience of nurses? So you want to think about that, like who are they speaking to, and who are they trying to persuade, or who do they want to get the message? So I do like this handout for that. It got a little off center there, but it goes through and it shows you like how to look at purpose, how to look at the subject matter, how you would look at an audience, and how that message is going to feed into the audience. And tone. Tone is big. As we know with friends, as we know, like we've talked about politicians, some politicians are really quiet and they're very subdued and they give their message very, very even, with an even tone, and some politicians are louder and they're more animated, and sometimes that plays into how a message is received. And I don't know about you, but if someone starts yelling at me, I kind of shut off, and so their tone ends up destroying the message. Whereas if they come with an even tone or an appropriate tone for the message, the message is better received. So that's something you want to determine as well when you're analyzing the videos or the written things that we're going to analyze. There was one more I wanted to look at. Here's another handout. It's a guide to rhetorical analysis. Okay, I really like this one a lot. Again, I'm not going to read it to you here because you can look at it. But again, this reiterates that rhetoric studies how writers use words to influence a reader. And I would argue that it's also for listeners or viewers as well. So sometimes we're persuaded through video or through, conversations. So all of this rhetoric plays into your regular life, your academic life, being a citizen life. Messages are given every single day. Rhetorical analysis, it separates a work of nonfiction into manageable parts. When you write your own rhetorical analysis for the article that you're going to choose, I'm asking you to sort of put that essay into parts. So you're going to have a paragraph or a section on ethos, a paragraph, a section on logos, a paragraph, a section on, which one did I forget? Well, one on logos, pathos, and ethos. So you're going to have a section for each, and I want those separated out. You don't have to do headers. My dog just hit something. I'm sorry. You don't have to do headers as much, but you do have to have a topic sentence that identifies that. I'll speak to that more in the video where we talk just about the essay. When you look at something, and I think this is a good guide when you're analyzing the Same Love video, when you're analyzing the commercials, this little handout here is really good to help guide you through how to disseminate the information. So you're going to look at the author. Is the author credible? Do they have authority over the topic? Have they written or have they displayed this information in another way? Why are they an authority on this? When you watch the Same Love video, I think it's interesting that the singer for Ben Macklemore, he's not gay, but he speaks for gay marriage. that was a problem. When he first wrote the song, he wrote it from a standpoint of being gay. His musical partner, they're both heterosexual. His musical partner, Ryan Lewis, said, you can't write a song about something you know nothing about, so you can't write from that standpoint. So he ended up rewriting it to be from the standpoint of being the nephew of an uncle who was gay and wanted to be married. So I think that's important to look at the person giving the message to see if they are an authority on the topic, because that helps the audience, the viewer, believe it or not. You want to look at the purpose or the intent of the message. Why did they write it? What audience do they want to reach? What are they trying to persuade? You want to look at the audience. And again, don't always assume it's for a general audience. Most messages are a little bit more direct than that. And it's not just for any old body. It's usually for a specific audience, even if that audience is a broad one. Even if a lot of people are part of that community, it's usually a message is meant for a certain group of people. You want to look at the style and tone. How is the message communicated? And like I said, tone is big. If something is angry, sometimes it can make the audience not listen anymore. When you analyze the text, you want to look, we call them appeals or strategies. So with rhetoric, we've already talked about it, logos, pathos, ethos. Those are appeals. Those are appeals to the audience to persuade them of a message. So I'm not going to go through all this again because we've already identified the pathos, the ethos, and the logos, but there are some good reminders here. And then I'm not going to go over this with you because it'll be in the next video, but this handout also talks about how to approach the different parts of a rhetorical analysis. Just as the annotated bibliography had some technical writing aspects to it, the rhetorical analysis has a few technical aspects to it. There are certain things that when you analyze for rhetoric, you're looking for specific points and specific criteria for how you come up with your analysis for that. And again, you're not just going to be doing this with your writing for your analysis for the article you're choosing. I'm also asking you to do this with a couple of videos, and you're going to do the discussion board. So I'm looking for you to mention logos, pathos, ethos, and all those things, and also to look at the message and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to close it out with this, but I just wanted to show you a few things. I hope this made sense, and I think in our future meetings, this is something that we can sort of hash out to make sure that you all understand what rhetoric is and how to approach the analysis of rhetoric.